Hello. I've just spent the last week reading Shakespeare. If you want to know why, then I've done a video about this where I explain it. So, as you will have known from watching that video, the intention was to read all of Shakespeare's works in a week. And did I do it? No, I didn't. I didn't read all of Shakespeare in a week, but I have now read all of Shakespeare's plays. Allow me to elaborate. So the kind of approach, the methodology to doing this was to read them in the order in which they're published in the edition that I have, which is the RSC edition of the complete works, which is also the same order that they appear in the first folio, plus the two other plays in this edition that aren't in the first folio, Pericles and the Two Noble Kinsmen. This edition doesn't include Edward III, and I've still not read Edward III, so technically I haven't read all of Shakespeare's plays, but, you know, that's how I set out. On the first day, I read the first play in this edition, and that was The Tempest, and I actually ended up reading 5 plays on day 1. In addition to The Tempest, I read The Two Gentlemen of Verona, The Merry Wives of Windsor, Measure for Measure, and The Comedy of Errors. And so by the end of day 1, I was left with the impression of, I can do this. And I really enjoyed day 1. I spent the entire day, literally the entire day, reading these plays. I started sort of 7, 8 a.m. and then I finished about 10:30, 11 p.m. On day 2, I read 4.5 plays. Those were Much Ado About Nothing, Love's Labour's Lost, A Midsummer Night's Dream, The Merchant of Venice, and the first 2 acts of As You Like It. I haven't read my minimum of 5 plays today, but also I'm reading the comedies. And if I need to spend an entire day just to get through 5 comedies, then how on earth am I going to read 5 or even 6 plays when I'm reading histories and tragedies, which it's going to be a little harder going, and they're longer. Shakespeare's longest plays are Hamlet and Richard III, which are both tragedies, and they're something like 31,000 words compared to the comedies, which are typically between sort of 18,000 to sort of 25,000 words maybe. So I started to have doubts on day 2, but I thought, you know, I did 5 plays yesterday, I did 4.5 today, I can do this. I just need to really get into my groove. So, day 3. On day 3, I read 2.5 plays. Yeah. So I finished reading As You Like It, and I read The Taming of the Shrew, and I read All's Well That Ends Well. But it was during day 3 that I thought, I ain't gonna do this. I'm already kind of behind. Well, I was already behind at the start of this day, and now at the end of this day, I'm really behind. And I just started to run out of steam a bit on day 3 after 2 days solid of more or less reading for the entire day. I really struggled to do that on day 3. So I thought, okay, I was kind of pissed off. I was feeling a bit low at this point that I wasn't going to do it, but I thought, okay, I'm not going to do it. Let's just accept that. So what can I do? Well, how about I finish reading the comedies and I read the histories? So by the end of the week, I can say I've read all the comedies and all the histories. So day 4 came, and on day 4, I read 2 plays. I read Twelfth Night and The Winter's Tale. So not only was I way too far behind on my original aim to pull that off, but I was now also behind on my kind of reduced aim, which was just to read the histories and the comedies. But also, I kind of thought, well, why am I focusing on reading the comedies and the histories when actually one of the main reasons for doing this was to read all of Shakespeare's works by the end of the week. Even if now I can't read all those works within that week, I can still aim to read what I haven't read by the end of this week. It seems kind of obvious now, but caught in the middle of this, this didn't really occur to me until on day 4. So I figured, well, let's just skip the ones that I've definitely read, and then read everything else. So by this point, by the end of day 4, I'd read all of the comedies from the first folio, and there were only 2 comedies left that weren't in the first folio. The rest were histories and tragedies. So on day 5, I read 2.5 plays. King John, Henry VIII, and the first 2 acts of Pericles. All I need to do now is read 3 plays tomorrow on day 6 and 3 plays the day after on day 7, and I'm done. I can do that because I read 5 plays on day 1. So on day 6 I read 3 plays, and those were all 3 parts of Henry VI. And on day 7 I was on track to do this. I read 2 plays, Troilus and Cressida and the 2 Noble Kinsmen. So I didn't quite pull off my reduced goal. I finished the plays. I read Timon of Athens, which was the last one, today on day 8. And I haven't read the sonnets and the poems. I did start to read the sonnets. I read about 30 or 40 sonnets actually on day 1, but then I stopped doing that after day 1 because I thought, well, there's no way I'm going to get through this if I'm kind of taking a detour into the poems, so I need to focus on the plays. So, but at this point, this is technically day 8, and I have now read all of Shakespeare's plays, with the exception of Edward III, which isn't in this edition, and Double Falsehood, which is, in any case, an adapted version of a lost Shakespeare play. So I feel pretty good about that. I have read 23 plays in 8 days. 22 of those were in the 7-day period where I thought I would read everything. And that's a total of over 500,000 words. There's actually a website I found that lists the word count for each of the Shakespeare plays, and the 23 that I've read comes to over 514,000 words, which is quite a lot of Shakespeare, and it's been quite an experience. I don't feel bad about the fact that I didn't achieve my original goal. I think that's fine. I got pretty annoyed about it on sort of day 2, day 3, when I could see that things weren't kind of on track. And sort of on day 4, when I was thinking about, oh, what can I do? But once I got back into my groove and I kind of was at peace with what it was I was trying to do, it went really well. And actually the best day of reading I had was day 6, where I read all 3 parts of Henry VI, because on day 6 I was clear in my mind what I was trying to do, and it was just a fantastic experience to read all 3 parts of this play in one day. I really enjoyed that, and I really enjoyed day 1, where I started this and I was full of energy and verve and ambition. That was really enjoyable, and it was really enjoyable. I mean, the most enjoyable parts were reading the plays I hadn't read before, perhaps unsurprisingly. In terms of the standouts for me, like I said before, all 3 parts of Henry VI. I mean, Henry VI is not often cited as Shakespeare's finest works. I don't think it's performed that often. I didn't realise that I had actually seen this adapted. I'd forgotten about it. But some of you may have seen this. The BBC did a really good adaptation of this entire cycle of plays, from Richard II right through to Richard III. They had Benedict Cumberbatch, I think, playing Richard III, which is the one I haven't seen, but I had seen the adaptation of Henry VI, which they did over 2 parts. So I really enjoyed that. I really enjoyed The Taming of the Shrew. So the plays I hadn't read before, I didn't really know anything about them, shockingly. Even though I've actually studied Shakespeare, my focus has been on those plays that I studied as opposed to Shakespeare as a whole. So I really knew nothing about The Taming of the Shrew. It is such an interesting play. It is really troubling, really problematic. I'd love to talk more about it, but I don't want to sort of analyse the plays too much in this video. I just want to talk about the experience of reading, this week of reading Shakespeare. But Taming of the Shrew there's a lot going on there, far more than I first took away from it. My initial reaction was, oh my god, that's horrific. But then you start to sort of think a bit more about the way that Shakespeare has framed the whole thing, and you think about the female characters in this play compared to female characters in other plays, and it becomes really, really interesting. So I really enjoyed Taming of the Shrew. I really enjoyed some of the kind of quote-unquote lesser comedies, the kind of shorter comedies that he wrote earlier in his career. So the Comedy of Errors, I thought that was a riot. I just absolutely loved it. And The Two Gentlemen of Verona as well. I think this is the thing that surprised me, was so many of these comedies, or at least quite a few of them, were, I mean, they say that, you know, comedy is tragedy avoided, and, you know, many of these comedies embody that, you know, have several acts of the play where it reads like a tragedy, you know, it is quite shocking. And then they sort of, you know, the kind of the levity, if you like, is redeemed in the final acts. That was really interesting. I never sat down to read this much Shakespeare in such a short space of time, and that was really interesting. There are other points where, either because of my mood or perhaps because of the play itself, I wasn't enjoying myself. I really struggled with The Merry Wives of Windsor. I just didn't enjoy it. I really struggled with Love's Labour's Lost and Much Ado About Nothing. The wordplay in those particular plays, it's so intricate that if you're reading at the pace that I had to read, it becomes quite difficult to remain engaged because it just goes over your head. It's so complex. Even though I'd seen Love's Labour's Lost in performance and read it before, and I've seen Much Ado About Nothing in performance and read it before, but still really struggled with them. And then I ended on a high, so unfortunately I didn't finish the final play on the final day. I read that today, but I really enjoyed Timon of Athens. That's something that I don't think is performed very much, but I would love to see an adaptation of Timon of Athens, particularly if you place that within the context of, say, the modern era, modern financial crashes perhaps. I think there's some really fascinating things that you can do with it. And I guess the other thing I was struck by, which is obvious to anybody who reads Shakespeare, but all of the cross-dressing, the really interesting stuff that is happening with gender and the performance of gender. I know that heaps of stuff is written about this, but I guess a lot of that stuff happens in the plays that I hadn't read before. I'm really glad I did this week. I would say that this week has been a success. Even though I didn't achieve what I'd originally set out to achieve, I still feel like I've achieved something. I've read all of Shakespeare's plays with the exception of Edward III, and I do intend to go and read the rest of the sonnets and the poems sort of gradually, probably over the next couple of weeks or so. I might dip into them to finish those off, and at some point I will pick up Edward III and read that, at which point I will have read all of his works. But at this point in time, after this week, I have read the vast majority of Shakespeare's works, so I feel pretty good about that. It's inspired me to seek out more adaptations of Shakespeare's works, so more television and film adaptations. I'd like to see more of them in performance. I've seen quite a few Shakespeare performances. I used to live in Nottingham, which is, if you know where Nottingham is in England, you'll know it's quite close to Stratford-upon-Avon, which isn't just where Shakespeare was born and where he died, but it's also where you can find the RSC, the Shakespeare Theatre, which is a fabulous venue, and I've seen many fabulous performances there, and some middling ones. The next time that we go back to England, we fully intend to see what's showing at the RSC Theatre and to see another performance. And I've never been to the Globe, and I'd love to go to the Globe and see something there. We actually have a pop-up Globe here in Auckland, which I think is now a permanent Globe. So I'm going to go and see something at the Globe in Auckland as well. I've fallen in love again with his works, and I can't wait to go back and reread them at a slower pace, to take this in a bit more and to study it a bit more. It's also given me a great idea for a little booktube project that I probably am not going to launch for many months, but I'm really excited about that as well. So there you go, that's it. I may return to Shakespeare related videos again in future. I'd love to do some kind of like little lists maybe, or recommendations with Shakespeare now that I've kind of read everything. But for now, I'll leave it there. If you have, or if you intend to read lots of Shakespeare in a short space of time, then share that with me, talk about that. I hope this maybe has inspired you to do it. I think it has been a very worthwhile endeavour. I've gotten a lot out of it. And even though I know it can be difficult to read this much Shakespeare in a week, and for me it was not possible to read the whole thing in a week, although I can see how it could be. If you read faster and you spent every week an hour doing it, then you could. I couldn't. But regardless, if you're at all interested in Shakespeare's works, then I just recommend trying this out. Just kind of say, oh, this week all I'm going to read is Shakespeare, and anytime I get a chance to read, I'm going to read Shakespeare. It's a wonderful experience, and it's just something you can come back to again and again. So yeah, I did it. I didn't do what I set out to do, but I did something, and I'm proud of myself. So yeah, I'll see you soon.